This week, first up in the security news, when an RCE really isn't, your kernel's vulnerable, calling all Windows 3.11 experts, back to eBay, Turkish websites and credentials, 10 public exploits for the same vulnerability, hacking Bitcoin ATMs, another vulnerability disclosure timeline gone wrong, Flipper Zero tips and how you should not use it to change traffic lights, Windows 11 S mode, and you're dead. But not like in real life, more like in the movie Hackers. All that and more on the security news. Then, I'm not done yet, we air a pre-recorded interview with Danny Jenkins, CEO and co-founder at ThreatLocker, where we discussed identifying bad by defining good. All that and more on this episode of Paul's Security Weekly. This is a Security Weekly production for security professionals by security professionals. Please visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe to all the shows on our network. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where exploits run wild, packets aren't the only things getting sniffed, and the cocktails flow steady. It's Paul's Security Weekly. In the ever-present threat of cyber attacks, even a simple wrong click can spell disaster. ThreatLocker built endpoint protection so you can operate a zero-trust security posture built on a default deny. ThreatLocker allows you to control what runs and what those applications can do, access, and how they interact. Don't let your trusted applications be used against you. For comprehensive protection against evolving threats, turn to ThreatLocker Cyber Heroes at securityweekly.com/ThreatLocker. Identity is at the core of every great digital experience. Ping Identity's solutions support the scale, flexibility, and resiliency required by enterprise-level IT teams for lasting digital transformation. With 99.99% uptime and over 3 billion identities under management, they're the only identity vendor that's proven to champion the scale, performance, and security of large enterprises. That's why Ping Identity champions your unique identity needs. They give you the tools to offer your users the right access at the right times, no matter how they connect with you. Visit securityweekly.com/Ping Identity to learn more. Are you ready to go beyond pen test reporting? Elevate your offensive security and measure risk reduction by streamlining pen test planning, report creation, and findings delivery. Request and attend a one-on-one personalized demo today at securityweekly.com/PlexTrack, and PlexTrack will send you a Starbucks $10, Euro, or Pounds gift card totally free just for your time. That's securityweekly.com/PlexTrack.
Welcome to the show. But first, let me introduce you to a man. If you want to destroy a sweater, hold the string while he walks away and watch him unravel, and he'll soon hack naked. Mr. Paul Asadorian.
Welcome, everyone, to Paul's Security Weekly, coming to you in super low definition compliments of Darth Vader himself. It's episode number 815, recorded on January 31st, 2024, right here in G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island. Mr. Larry Pesce is to my left.
Woohoo! I am.
What's up, man?
Bob.
You got your minions. I couldn't think of the word earlier.
Kevin.
No, this is Bob. Kevin's a little taller.
Mm.
Yeah, this one's Bob, and unfortunately, Bob is missing his insides because, well,
yeah, you gutted him. Like literally gutted him.
Bob's insides are right here.
That's amazing.
Yep,
that's
Holy
awesome.
crap. What was inside Bob?
A Wi-Fi router.
We could tell you what all the chips were, but we're doing a show. Maybe in another segment.
Yeah, RTL 8189.
Oh, there you go.
And a WinBond 1 gigabyte flash. Yeah.
Mr. Sam Bound.
Way.
Mr. Sam Bound has joined us. Sam, welcome.
Good evening. I'm glad to be here. Your Minion statue reminds me, when we went to DEF CON China, the only restaurant open late was named Minions, and the waitresses were all dressed as Minions, and the food was the most god-awful stuff I've ever had in my life.
Oh, jeez.
What? Hold on. What kind of food do they serve at the Minions restaurant?
Banana.
Serve stuff that is like shish kebab, hunks of meat on a stick, burned to a crisp,
Ooh.
and there is some kind of spice that just seems to be dirt that you can pile on it.
Wow.
It was amazing.
Sounds like when I first
bananas.
But that you just described the first few times I made barbecue.
Yeah.
Mr. Josh Marpet is here with us. Josh, welcome.
I feel your pain. When I started barbecuing, it was, I think it's edible. You know, at this point, however, it's gotten much better.
It does. You got to make a lot of bad barbecue before you make good barbecue.
Yeah.
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 You arguably have to make a lot of good food before it gets better too. When my wife and I first moved in together, one night we had steak marinated in red wine. Great. A couple of days later, we had some steak marinated in buffalo sauce, and it was great. And about a week later, we decided two great tastes. They got to taste great together, right? So steak marinated in red wine and buffalo sauce. McDonald's was amazing that night.
Yeah, I bet. Mr. Lee Neely is here with us. Lee, welcome.
Good to be here. It's a lovely Wednesday evening, and the over here we're in like fall, spring or something. We're getting some 60-degree weather, but we've been warned, don't unpack the warm stuff because it's going to get cold again.
All righty. Good to have you here, Lee. Before we get into it, I got a couple of announcements. Some of the Security Weekly hosts are under the leadership of Mr. Bill Brenner, our dear friend, who I just shared some cigars with. We had our own cigars, but we were both. I say that, and anyway. Right. Mr. Bill Brenner.
Bill had a cigar, and you had a cigar. You didn't
and
share
we
a
sat
cigar.
together and had cigar.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So don't let third-party risk ruin your Valentine's Day. Join Adrian Sanabria and Bill Brenner on an SC Media webcast titled "Understanding Third-Party Risk by Studying Third-Party Breaches." As listeners know, Adrian loves exploring risk through understanding of real breaches and incidents. They'll discuss how to prepare for some of the most concerning third-party risk you should be aware of, along with the partner for the webcast, Process Unity. You can visit securityweekly.com/Valentine Risk to register. Go ahead and check that out. Adrian's a dear friend of mine, so as I think of all of us, so and Bill is too. So we see our friends do a webcast. Security Weekly listeners can save $100 on their RSA 2024 full conference pass. RSA conference will take place May 6th to May 9th in San Francisco and on demand. To register using the discount code, please visit securityweekly.com/RSAC24. Use the code 54USECweekly. That's that.
And speaking of which,
who got accepted? A bunch of people got accepted. A bunch of people didn't get accepted.
Adrian Sanabria.
I didn't get accepted, but I didn't submit. So there's that.
Akira Brand. And yours truly.
That's right.
Yep. Wow. Yeah.
I know that JJ Manila got like 2 different panels. There's a lot of people in our sort of circles that got accepted, and RSA should have some really, really good talks this year.
Is it one circle or multiple circles, Josh?
Well, it depends on how kinky you are.
Well, is there like clicks? I guess there is. It's kind of clicky, but we all still are in the same circle, but there's circles within the circles.
Yes.
It's like
yes.
mishmash of Venn diagrams.
There are many Venn diagrams.
It is. There are many Venn diagrams, but this one is mine.
Yes.
That's right. Yes. All right.
A vendor-specific Venn diagram?
Could be. A lot of Venn diagrams.
It's more along the lines of I've been here a while and I met a lot of people. That's it's a Venn diagram of if I don't know somebody, I probably know their best friend. And you guys are the same way, of course. But it's just we've been around a while. We know a lot of people.
I got a lot of really
old farts.
We are. And the old farts have some stories to talk about. Where do you old farts want to start talking about?
The old farts, Windows 3.1.1.
Oh, okay. So let's go old.
Yes.
Yeah. So I thought this was just funny. I think they've since taken down the job posting for this, but there was, in fact, a job posting. I'm trying to find what story number is
Your
that?
number 5.
Thank you.
And
my number 5.
Weird. Okay. Yeah. Your number 5, and I think it was in there somewhere as well. So.
Oh, I get a refresh for you.
You're number 4, Larry, but
Yep.
it hasn't gotten to the website yet.
That's okay.
That's okay. So there's a train company in Germany that listed an admin job for the 30-year-old, speaking of making us feel old, 30-year-old operating system, Windows for Workgroups 3.11. So they posted a vacancy, and I think there's a web archive. So we get to read the actual job posting, because once you put something on the internet, it's there forever, even if you take it down. It's one of those things.
It's older than 30 years old. My first corporate job was in 1990, and I was, which is 33 years old, and I did admin on Windows 3.11 back then. And it was for Thomson Reuters. It was honest to, you're going to laugh.
Or did they take it down?
was
It's
for
not loading.
CD-ROM jukeboxes full of research reports for investment banks and financial institutions.
Mm.
So it was a very, very long time ago.
I mean, I was running Windows 3.1.1 in high school, and actually, I remember it was a big deal when I got to upgrade to Windows 95 in my sophomore year of high school, which would have been
Archive thing is
1994,
crashing
1995
my
time frame.
browser.
So
Stop that.
Wasn't
Okay, I'm better now. So
sure.
yeah.
You know, we should talk about Mert on the.
I know we talked about it before,
Just
but
kidding.
anyway.
Inside joke. Windows
Yeah.
3.1.1.
Windows 3.1.1. Yeah. So they rely on MS-DOS and Windows 3.1.1 applications.
And it might be required until 2030 or later in this particular.
Oh,
I'm
wow.
just impressed it's still.
This was also known as Windows for Work
For-
groups. And if you wanted to do IP, there was a separate IP stack you loaded.
And IPX, SPX, there was another stack for that.
Can you?
Yep.
You can still. Does this run on modern hardware?
Yes.
Well, this-
Windows 3.1.1? Absolutely.
I mean, you got to disable secure boot, obviously.
Yeah. You probably need to slow the CPU down a bit. I mean, these guys were.
Well, you gotta
using
push the
166
you just push the
megahertz
turbo-
CPUs with 8 megs of RAM.
Just push the turbo button.
Yeah, totally. To turn
MS-DOS 6.22 will still run on modern hardware as well. Very well, by the way.
That's pretty amazing, actually. That it still runs.
Yep.
Well,
I mean,
you got to
also,
remember
like,
that
We can scowl at
There
it
isn't-
all we want. Like, where are your exploits for Windows 3.1? Like, is it so old that it's now secure?
And this is probably one of those that ain't broke, don't fix it.
Right.
I mean, this is a control system, isn't it? This isn't a general purpose computer, is it? I would imagine.
Is it networked?
It is to do railway display boards across almost all of Germany. So I would say it's networked.
I'd say networked. Oh boy.
It's either that or dial-up.
Yeah, it's dial-up. That's what I was going to say.
Did that thing do a blue screen of death?
no, didn't have a blue screen
you
of
ever
death.
walked-
It just went back to DOS.
Yeah, right?
Remember when you'd walk through an airport or something and the display would be on a blue screen of death every now and then?
This predates blue screen of death. That's how old it is.
Yeah, I was thinking, it'd be DOS screen of death or something like that.
Right? You would just get a nasty error in DOS, if I remember correctly.
Yep.
If memory serves. I mean, this, again, was 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I mean,
I'm wondering why they haven't upgraded if it's those, but it's probably an it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, honestly, I wouldn't be surprised if it was related to the hardware that actually does the display. That those displays are permanently mounted in the train station, and they're probably expensive to replace, and they're tied to very specific software.
They're
So
probably
still
some kind of
probably
weird
monitors
connector.
weigh a metric ton.
Yep. Josh?
They're probably
Go ahead,
they probably have some ridiculously proprietary connector, something resembling either SCSI or Parallel, I'm guessing, that old. And you know anything that can address a parallel port these days? So yeah, it's probably just a proprietary hardware that won't die. They're like, screw it, leave it alone.
Yeah.
Craziness.
Yeah.
I did want to talk about the Flipper. Now that you said that, Larry,
Yeah, sure.
the Flipper Zero.
I mean-
And so the reason I bring this up, and I know we talked about it earlier, but I have a slightly different take on it, and another story about a Flipper as well.
Which story
My
number?
story number 16. I'm just the content that's out there that's talking about the Flipper Zero is like it irks me to no end. And one of the things that irks me is that this was posted almost a year ago, where I put it in our internal Slack. There was a dude that used the Flipper to basically interface with the MERT.
Yep.
And so what led me here was I saw the article advertised to me on social media.
Yep.
Oh, you can use a Flipper Zero to change traffic lights to green. I'm like, okay, I saw this a year ago when we covered it. I've been seeing it ever since. I'm still seeing it today.
We talked about it literally with the Flipper Zero 3 weeks ago.
Yeah,
on the show because Bill was here and Bill's the Mert guy.
Right. This article that I read, I didn't even link to in the show notes, but it referenced Bill's original i-hack.com post from 2005.
Yeah, same as the one we took over 3 weeks ago.
When Bill built the first thing Bill was the dude who, I wish he was here tonight to talk about it, but like literally built it. And like the only thing that's really changed, and so I dug in a little, I'm like, how are they, like, why is this a Flipper Zero thing? You don't need a Flipper Zero to do this.
Nope.
Bill did it in 2005.
Yep.
Almost 19 years ago now. Bill did it before there was Flipper Zeros, but the Flipper Zero, I went in my menu and did this. You have some of those there. You go into apps, GPIO.
Yep.
And what is the other sub menu underneath GPIO? There's another menu under GPIO of tools, I want to say. And then underneath that, there's PW something. And it basically, if you connect an LED to two of the GPIO pins, you can control the frequency and how fast it pulses, kind of thing, in there, right? And so they're just using that functionality of the Flipper to be able to control an LED with these two GPIO pins at a certain frequency and certain cadence, and that gets hooked up to a whole bunch of other gear that can then emit the infrared necessary to trigger the, I forget what the device is called, that sits on traffic lights. Don't do this. It's illegal. You should not be doing this. This is for emergency vehicles. You can actually go to prison if you do this, because it's not cool to do this. I mean, unless you go, did Bill purchase a traffic light?
Nope.
Or he just purchased the device, the Opta something that goes on top of the traffic light to test it?
I don't know how he tested it.
I started reading his original post.
I think he bought the device.
Yeah.
And then he just multimetered the change traffic light leads coming off of it type of thing.
Right.
But the idea here is that, by the way, it's not, you could go to jail. You will go to jail.
It's bad.
Because the cameras that are on the
right now,
lights,
these cameras,
are IR sensitive.
Are IR sensitive. They can see you emitting that light.
Yep.
Yeah, if it's the IR light, they can see you emitting that light, and if it's the Wi-Fi signal with the geosync signal, it can obviously pick that up and monitor that. They will know which car it was, license plate. They will come knocking on your door and go, "Hi, please turn around. We've got pleasant bracelets for you."
Yeah,
and you're going to jail.
Like so many things with the Flipper Zero, people are like, "Oh, I asked with a Flipper Zero." I'm like,
just because you can doesn't mean you should.
And like so many of us have hacked the same shit without a Flipper Zero. In this case, 19 years ago, right? This is Flipper Zero. Yes, has the functionality. Talk about that. I hate the way it's presented. Like on the internet today, the way the Flipper Zero is presented just really it irks me, and I just want to put that out there for our audience. Like, God, there's accounts that I follow on Instagram that I want to reach through the internet and slap someone and be like, dude. So stop that. I'm like, secondly, the picture that you just put on your Instagram is from an article, number 16, that I linked to, that you stole his picture and you put it on your social media as if it was you. And like, don't do that.
That's not cool.
I mean, this person wrote a nice article. So I don't want to take away from this person's article on my number 16. He said, "Is a Flipper Zero is a great tool for the pen tester, or is an expensive toy for the drawer." And he went through some scenarios of him using the Flipper Zero for things like cloning credit cards, cloning NFC, RFID, stuff like that. Which Proxmark III, way better platform for that. I got mine running. I put my picture of my Proxmark III on social media. It was my original picture. After I put the Iceman firmware on a device that I ordered at a significant discount, which I don't want to give out publicly because I don't want them to sell out. But if you're in the market for a Proxmark III, contact me. I can show you where to buy it. At least the one I got from this place supports the Iceman firmware. I got that on there. I cloned one of my own RFID cards. I don't know if it's RFID or NFC. It's actually my key access card for the cigar club next door. I cloned that.
Probably RFID.
Yeah. And I was like, oh, it works. Great. I'm like, now I've got a lot of other stuff to learn about how to use my Proxmark 3. And it's the, what are the letters that denote the version of it? PM, PMV, DEM. What is the, crap, it's in my bag in the next room. It's a version, it's a 2, not a 3 or a 4.
For what?
Right? The Proxmark 3.
Oh, the Proxmark 3. RDV.
RDV 2 is the one that I got. And RDV 4 is the latest version.
Yep.
But you had told me, Larry, that the RDV 2, you're like, I actually like that.
Mine is my favorite is the RDV 2.
Yeah. And so I haven't got a significant discount, took the Iceman firmware. I'm off to the races at a significant discount. It was $139 versus depending on which version you pick,
300-ish.
Yeah, 300 to 400-ish, depending on battery and all that. Or if you get it's like the Proxmark equivalent of a Portapack. What is that called? Well, then they got the iCopy. I feel like it's that's like the Portapack version of the Proxmark, right?
Josh,
well, you have an iCopy, right?
Yeah, I have the iCopy. The iCopy is great. It's basically it's not the fastest, but I don't do. I do it for fun. I enjoy playing with it.
Academic purposes. That's why I have mine. That's why I haven't played around with it, because I am not physical pen testing to do this stuff. So I didn't want to make the investment because I'm like, this is just an academic thing. When I could get the version, what did we say the letters were? I always forget what they were. RDV 2. When I get the RDV 2 for $139, I'm like, oh, I'll add it to my toolkit and I'll mess around with it, right?
Yep.
The nice thing about the iCopy, you ever see the Proxmark Pro? It's basically an upgraded version of the Proxmark Pro.
Nice.
Okay.
Nice.
Lee, sorry.
So what I was thinking about this is, I've been, hearing and talking to folks and seeing what they do with their Flipper Zeros. And I was talking to a buddy of mine about, how it was cool, and he freaking gave me one. So I'm like, okay, now I got to learn how to use it. And that's cool. And some stuff works like that. Other stuff you got to practice with, just like anything else. But I'm thinking about when we first started trying to pen test, hack, whatever, it didn't always work the first time. You had to learn how.
And I sent you.
There aren't better, but hey.
I sent you my cheat sheet that I only share.
Yes, you did.
I only share with trusted people.
It's right there.
Yeah.
He points at his monitor where Paul can't see it.
Yeah. Well, if you're listening and you're like, why doesn't Paul share it publicly? It's because too many people are doing shenanigans out there. Mm-hmm. And I'm kind of in the mode right now with that stuff of like, I have to know you and trust you to share what I've learned. Yep. And it's not rocket science. It's not anything like bleeding edge. So they're basically shortcuts for you to get stuff on the Flipper. So I'm gonna, you could do like really unethical and immoral things.
I'm going to throw this out there. So you're gatekeeping.
I'm gatekeeping. I am. I'm gatekeeping. I am. No, right. I'll admit it. I am gatekeeping.
And I say this tongue in cheek.
Yeah, because you could figure it out on your own, which is kind of where I want to leave it. If you want to try and go get the customer assistance sub-gigahertz stuff, like I want to make you go search for that stuff on the internet, put it on your Flipper manually, at least have that as a barrier to entry. If I give you my stuff, it's going to put a lot of crap on your Flipper, like automatically, basically. And I don't know that I want that for every clown out there.
And I say you're gatekeeping, and I say that tongue in cheek, but you have always been one of those folks that said, hey, and on the show publicly that, hey, this is how I learned when I was coming up in the industry. It was, I've got this really hard problem, and I'd go to the sysadmins, and they'd say, well, what did you try? Right. Well, I haven't tried anything yet. Well, go try something, and then if you have a problem, come back and ask
I don't want to give the internet at large my shortcut. Basically, because I want you to figure it out on your own. The Flipper's already somewhat of a shortcut.
Yeah,
I've got the shortcut for the shortcut, right?
Right, like, because you put the time in, you went and learned something, and when someone has a question, they can come and ask, and you'd be happy to give them some help. So I say the gatekeeping tongue in cheek,
but also the infrared stuff too. He talks about in this article. That's actually a platform that I'm pretty impressed with on the Flipper, right? If you put the work in, you can go find the infrared databases. You can transfer them to your Flipper. I'll leave that for you as an exercise to go figure out. It's not hard. You can get there probably pretty quickly. But again, I'm not going to give you give me my shortcut. Go do it. But it interfaces with all kinds of infrared devices. And if you go get the add-on boards, if you listen to the show and pay attention, we talked about places where you can go get infrared add-on boards from reputable sources, Rabbit Labs. being one of those in a very reputable source, and you can extend the range and I want to say spectrum, but the beam width. Thank you, Larry. The beam width of it, right? I mean, you see me here in the studio when I first got it. I can turn all the TVs off, at once because it extends that. But again, I want people to go do that on their own, right?
Paul, do you just have a habit of pissing off the production staff in the studio?
I do.
I mean, you start the Bluetooth thing and then turning off all the TVs in the studio.
But I have a different perspective on that. I feel like the production crew or any similar folks like that should be more resilient. That's just, you know what I'm saying? Like,
okay, don't kill him. We need him for the podcast.
If I can do it, so can anyone else, right?
Yes.
But not everybody can defend themselves.
Theoretically. Right. I'm also pretty willing to work with people. So if you want defensive recommendations, let's have a conversation.
No.
That's cool too. But realize not so much with infrared, sub gigahertz though, or any radio frequency, interference is interference. It could be me interfering, or it could be any type of radio frequency interference. If you're
microwave,
if you're not resilient to that for something that is mission critical, then that's a problem that you've got to solve. And my solution, which I shared with the production team last week, was you should probably run a wire, right? You should get away from RF transmissions and you should run a wire. If it's that critical to your business function, I think Larry and I and all of us on the show would make the same recommendation to any customer or client or friend or whatever and go, you know what, yes, you could try and harden that RF device as much as you can, but at the end of the day, jamming is jamming, and jamming is going to be effective regardless of how you're implementing the protocol, all of that stuff. Jamming is jamming, right?
Did I ever tell you my favorite jamming story?
Let's jam on the jamming story, Josh.
This is my favorite jamming story. So there was a machine shop, they do machinist work, cutting metal and such, and they needed to run Wi-Fi for some of the CNC machines that they were bringing in. This was a manual machinist shop that was just moving to some CNC stuff, and they wanted to run some Wi-Fi to get diagrams and tool paths and all that stuff moved over, right? G code and such. And so they stuck an AP in there and it wouldn't work, just wouldn't work at all. So what the hell? So they called in a couple of people that knew wireless. This is way back in the day, 802.11.
It was new.
It was new.
It was brand new.
At one time, kids, 802.11 was new, and we had B.
Yep.
Yeah. We had B.
And B became before A?
Yep.
Yes. Yes, it did. So anyway, so we walk in and we're what else is here? Do these machines, they're manual metal machines. They shouldn't really cause interference unless you got unshielded arc electricity going through them. What the hell's going on here? And it turns out
it was the
lights.
Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know
I've heard
why?
the story. This is how old we are and how long we've all known each other, is that when we tell stories, we're we've heard this story.
They were using inductive capacitance type of deal to send wireless power to the lights or something?
They were beaming 2.4 gigahertz ISM, unregulated radio frequency at the lights to run them because they didn't want wires running across the shop for fear they would get cut and electrocute somebody. So they were basically running fluorescent tubes with wireless energy, which meant that the entire shop was so full of it, you could probably taste the electricity. And wireless was just absolutely impossible. Literally impossible. Jammed beyond belief.
Gotta love it.
That's crazy. Just last couple of things.
Speaking of which, Josh, do you know the difference between jam and jelly?
I do, but I'm not going to ask. I'm not going to say that line on the show.
I can't jelly my finger up your nose.
That was a different line than the one I know. Yes. Okay. Very well, sir.
That's the family safe one, right?
So the other the other things he tested in the Flipper article was the bad USB, which it works. There's not much more to say about that. You can do bad USB stuff with it; it's fine. Also, U2F device and USB to UART adapter works. Again, also it throws Bluetooth spam like a champ, right? So it's again, we're gonna come back to the Flipper Zero is the Swiss Army knife. It does many things. Some better than others,
Yep.
but it packs those many things into a thing you can carry in your pocket.
Absolutely. And
Right.
Arguably, the Swiss Army knife as a multi-tool can be good at what it does, but you'll never know how they built the knife because all those tools were put together for you. So if you really want
Yes.
to know how to sharpen your knife, you maybe need to dig into it a little bit more. You maybe need to go buy some stones, and in fact, maybe you should buy a different knife altogether because of the quality and the additional features and so forth. So sort of my take on it is, I love the flipper.
You got two of them sitting there.
I love that they are a tool to get folks to experiment
Yes.
and potentially be safe, and can spur that learning. Like, that's awesome. Bluetooth spam. How does it work? Well, great. Now you go and buy an inexpensive Bluetooth adapter. You start looking at how the code was. You look at some of these projects, and now you can start doing all this other Bluetooth stuff. And
Yes. You know what's frustrating though with the Bluetooth adapters? Is I was looking at the Bluetooth stuff that you can inject keystrokes with that you got working recently.
Yep.
And the author,
hi, my name is Keyboard.
Hi, my name is Keyboard, but the author, whose name escapes me at the moment, presented at ShmooCon, and is also the person who discovered the mouse jacking attack. But in the Hi, my name is Keyboard research that he published, he says, I use this Bluetooth adapter. I was like, cool. And I went to the Amazon link that he published. And it was like, you purchased this in 2021. I'm like, really? I'm like, where? I can't find it for the life of me. I just can't find it. It's like $11.99, so I had to order another one.
I can tell you.
I have two, but I can
tell you exactly where it is. It's in the drawer next to my Bluetooth adapter of the same one, whichever. Yes, I need to come up with an inventory system of all of my stuff, and in fact,
it's in that place I hid that thing one time.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where it is. It's where it is.
It's totally there.
Totally there.
Yep.
So I had a question. I'm thinking about, the Proxima and the Flipper, and it's like, in the context, are we seeing, like Flipper labs at conferences yet? It seems like that's going to become a thing.
I mean,
whatever,
there should be. I want to see more hardware labs at conferences.
That would be cool.
More hands-on hardware hacking.
Like an opportunity to sell flippers, an opportunity for vendors to sell add-ons, and maybe even a small test venue.
So you bring stuff for people to try it out in a controlled environment, so they don't have to go to their local bar and go, hey, can I turn off all the TVs? Let's see if this works.
Yeah.
Right. And isolated enough so like at the venue, you're not taking out the Bluetooth on the working staff who have absolutely no idea what this hacking stuff's all about.
Yep.
But you got targets you can mess with, so you're not going to piss off the venue.
So that's a great thing, Paul. You were sharing some stuff in Slack today, and you posted a video, and you said this guy's channel has some other interesting stuff, which I was like, I spent like a half an hour looking through some of the stuff. That's pretty cool.
He's got some chops.
And the one on the Flipper Zero that he had was like the news follow up from the furry convention in the Midwest, where people were doing Flipper stuff and about the news, and he actually went and collected all the stuff that was the tweets about people saying, hey, you impacted my insulin pump.
Yes.
Hey, you're doing this in the vendor area and you're taking out all of our Square terminals. We're hobbyists and we help make a living from some of the stuff. Knock it off. This isn't funny. And then there was even a story that was on one of the news stations where they brought their technology expert in, and I think that I kind of fast forwarded through a lot of it because I was busy, but the news expert, the technical expert, did a pretty good description about what it was, but the part that really threw me off was that they were saying that someone had brought it into a school and they jammed all the cell phones with it. And I'm like, no, they didn't. No, they didn't. They probably did the Bluetooth spamming attack and crashed the phones.
Yes, crashed the phones.
But it was presented as they brought it in and they jammed all the cell phones.
If they jammed the phones, the FCC would be up their ass so fast it's not even funny.
Correct.
You might be surprised.
Yeah.
Well,
that's totally illegal.
They should be, Josh. I agree.
Right. They should
be.
Right. So
they did it on FM radio. They'd be up their ass fast. But phones, they don't know how to deal with it anymore. So
they wouldn't be up their ass that surprising with FM radio either. It is here in the U.S. Unless you're near an airport, it is a complaint-driven system,
Right.
and it requires multiple complaints for the FCC to even investigate.
Yeah.
They used to have vans that would drive around and look for pirate radio stations.
Yeah.
I guess when that became less popular, they abandoned that.
Very few and far between on those vans. They had those vans, and they wouldn't show up anywhere unless there was a complaint.
They need to partner with Google for all the vans that run around, drive around for Google Maps, and they just need to partner with the FCC.
Yeah. Case in point, there was
we want Google to collect more data.
Google,
Thanks,
we want Google to have more data. Like, you live here, and oh, by the way, you've got an FCC violation. And now we know that about you.
Case in point, Josh, there is a pirate radio station in Miami that recently shut down and got fines, but it had been operating for 20 years. And the only
That's a good run. I call that a good run.
And the only reason why it got shut down was
someone complained.
Someone finally complained about it.
Well, the music's good. Why complain? You know?
Exactly.
I want to talk about another hardware hacking story. It's my story number one.
Number one. I ordered you to take a number two.
Is this? No, sorry, that wasn't the hardware hacking one. No, what's the other hardware hacking one? Is my story number 8? Yes, my story number 8.
Oh, yes.
Firmware key extraction by gaining EL3. Now, very extensive post, highly technical.
Yes.
Some highlights that I pulled from this post. Essentially, this person evaluated an older version of the hardware and was able to get to the point of extracting firmware and doing analysis and very, very quickly. Then the company said, well, that's our older version. Our newer version has protections against that, right? It
Challenge
includes
accepted.
Firmware encryption. It includes, protecting the bootloader and the boot process. And so the author was like, what if I could break the latest model, he says. So back to eBay.
He says, self, what if I can break the latest model, self?
So back to eBay really resonates with me. Folks that do a lot of hardware hacking have usually accompanying with that pretty hefty eBay habit of buying stuff on eBay.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Pull it apart. Yes. So I thought that resonated with me for sure.
Local auctions and high bid.
It's interesting, though, the technique this person used, and some of my coworkers were trying to explain this to me. He says he followed this, so he couldn't find a very clear header to solder onto to get serial or UART access, so you can see the boot up sequence at least, right? So he said he followed the tracks. It leads, but he followed the tracks from a resistor. Now I gotta.
Yep, it was from a resistor.
From a resistor. He followed the tracks of the resistor. I'm assuming it's a step down resistor for 5-volt power to a serial. Is that right, Larry?
I don't know. Yeah. Either way, it was effectively what ended up happening was he found that it was not broken out to a specific header that he could identify, but at a convenient test point at one of these resistors, he was able to find a
signal
console
on one resistor.
Yep. So,
how does a serial signal go through a resistor?
Easy. I mean, in many cases, you will have a resistor in line for some of that sister stuff.
It's in line with the serial connection to prevent voltage overload on the serial port.
All sorts of stuff.
I mean, it's
smoothing.
It's not a gate. It just is resistance. The signal still passes.
Yep, I gotcha. So we found a serial signal on one resistor. Following the tracks, it leads to the USB-C power connector through some small IC or integrated circuit. Right.
Okay. Yep. So they took serial and they put it over USB-C effectively
with an integrated controller, integrated circuit. Right. And then he says adding a pull-up to the SBU pin of one of the USB-C connector, and we have boot logs directly on the USB-C connector. So he basically
put voltage on one pin on the USB-C connector, and now you've got
serial. So he basically pulled serial off of the USB connector by reverse engineering the actual hardware that was implementing that in plain English.
Which is cool. It takes some skills.
Yep.
It's very cool.
I like that part of it a lot. I was like, I didn't know that was possible. I learned something.
USB-C is wild.
Because there's a lot of stuff you can glom on. It's power, it's data, it's serial. There's a lot of
there's custom and there's a negotiation protocol, and USB-C is wild, man. Hackaday actually had a couple of things recently on USB-C. if you're interested, you should go check out. I don't have, it was in the last couple of weeks. So if you go search
like power
Hackaday.
stuff like that's really interesting because I think most people think like, oh, like I plug this device into power and it's USB-C and like it just always like magically works. And the reason it magically works is because there's integrated circuits and logic inside of that stuff that's like talking to each other going, how much how much power do you need? Right?
There's firmware that talks to things.
And those little power bricks, like this power brick I have right here, is one of the cheaper Chinese ones. I don't know if you can see it like that.
Making a jaw.
I bought one.
Yeah, and it's got like a bunch of USB-C.
They're really nice.
Yeah, but there's firmware on there that those are convenient, right? Because I can power my laptop and like a boatload of other stuff if I need, which usually I have because I got my power my flippers and power my even my earbuds are USB-C, right? I've got my hack already, like all my devices. Now I got one brick, and this is 100 watts. More than 100 watts?
Probably 200.
It's a lot of 165. I think it's 165. You can get them at like 165, 200 range, which means you've got enough wattage.
More than enough to power your laptop and a bunch of
your
other stuff.
Right? In the top
and it was like $40 on Amazon. It was really cool.
Yeah, did I send you the link to the one I bought?
Deal.
Did I send you this link?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Yep. It's nice.
Hey,
where are we going next? Sorry, I want to cover the hardware stuff.
I want Sam to grab one of his stories here because I know Sam typically has to leave a little bit on the earlier side.
Of Sam's
Sam's got a
stories,
ton of stuff.
I wanted Sam. Sam, I'm curious about Windows 11 S mode.
I know.
Is that for speed? Is that for speed?
No, security.
No, this got my attention because the semester started and I assigned my students homework and they came back saying, I can't install things like Wireshark. And I'm like, what's going on? And if you buy a new Windows machine, you get it in this S mode, which I'd never heard of, which locks it down like an iPhone. You can only use Edge, you can't use other browsers, and you can only install apps from the Microsoft Store. And it is possible to turn it off. We Googled for how to turn it off, but when you try to turn it off, this big box pops up and say, turning this off will compromise the security of your device. It may get infected. You cannot reverse turning it off, and it will slow down and impair the performance of your device if you have certain processors. So it scares people. So it's more secure to be in S mode, but I was pretty shocked. It's a surprising default to give someone buying a Windows machine. You're really getting something more like a Chromebook or an iPad.
That's
anyway.
Well, I mean, remember that commercial?
People care. I mean,
remember that commercial? What's a computer?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how badly did that piss you off when that kid said that when they were holding that iPad? What's a computer? And right. It's really the way it's going. It is not. They're converging on locking things down to the point that you're getting a Chromebook, not a laptop. Power users are getting edged out. So that's why Linux for power users is becoming more and more popular.
Are you saying this is the year of the Linux desktop?
No, I'm not. Never will be. But I'm saying it's the year of Linux desktop for people that are frustrated with being locked out of maximizing the usefulness of their devices.
Well, I have an iPhone, and I really appreciate the fact that it's never infected and I never have to worry about it. So, I mean, there is a place for these lockdown devices, but it's not typically expected.
Yeah, I mean, until Sam, you're targeted with something like Pegasus or anything like that.
Or until, because of the EU, they have to modify the App Store to allow sideloading.
That's my story number one, which I thought is really big. They're going to have the store starting in March in Europe. The alternative stores, Apple says they're going to scan the security of alternative stores and charge a fee there too, but a lower fee. And people are arguing about it. It won't affect people in America right away, but I would predict pretty soon it'll come over here. So that will have unknown consequences for the security of the iPhone.
Yep.
Interesting.
But it does show European ability to regulate tech companies, which we don't have in America. I mean, our tech companies have such powerful lobbies that we really can't pass any regulations for them here. So we just inherit regulations from Europe.
There's
some truth. Yeah, you're not wrong, Sam. I want to go back to S mode for a moment, though, because I'm kind of liking this, and I'm wondering if I enabled S mode on an Asus ROG Ally that I bought my kids that runs Windows 11, which I was wondering why the interface was it was different enough to be super annoying. Like, why is it so annoying? And it's hard to like discern because it's a very small screen, but it's Windows, and I'm like, oh, because they shipped it with Windows 11. Like, wow, now I know what people are talking about with 11. It's freaking horrible. Like, all right, let me change some settings, or there has to be a PowerShell script out there that's like, make Windows 11 great again. Something like, there's one for Windows 10 is like, make Windows great again.
It turns it back into Windows 98.
It turns it into something that's a lot more usable. In any case, I wonder if you enable S mode. Classic shell, yeah. If you enabled S mode in Windows 11, if like all the functionality on my ROG alleys would still work. Like if, I could still run the apps that I want to run.
Only if you installed them from the Microsoft Store.
But what if they're already there? Can I still?
But you can't turn it on. So
I don't think you can. I don't think you can turn it on after you've installed other things, and maybe not at all.
Okay.
You have to start in S mode, and when you turn it off, they warn you there's no going back. So it's just the same. It's just like jailbreaking an iPhone, right? Apple doesn't want to hear from you again after you do that.
Yep. You want to turn it back. You got to reflash it and put it back to factory defaults. Right. And
I think so.
That's what I would argue.
Yeah, so it might be good for security, but anyway, it's an important thing to be aware of. Yet another bizarre problem people are with their Windows. When they say, I can't install simple things on Windows, this is the reason.
Interesting. I never thought about it that way, but that makes sense. If you've got a lockdown, I mean, how many people need, out of the population of people that have laptops, how many people need the ability to do power user things, and how many people are just going to use it for browsing?
A lot.
And an occasional email, and email, browsing, shopping, maybe Word and Excel.
It's a Windows Chromebook at that point. It's a Windows book.
Is that wrong?
It's a Windows book, or would they call it a Surface? They already have a Surface book, but that's hardware specific.
Yep.
It's crippleware. Let's be clear.
Crippleware.
Yeah.
I don't. That's not politically correct. I don't think you can say that.
It's handy capable wear.
Handy capable wear. No, but like seriously, is there thinking from the point of view of, let's look at the support costs for the major part of the population? How many people in any given 1,000 or million or whatever actually are going to need to do things that this is not going to let them do?
It's really not much different than what we have in public labs here, where you don't have
I suspect there's a significant chunk of users that's not going to impact them negatively, and then there's a much smaller set that it will.
I will apologize. I may have been a little bit insensitive there. It is in fact differently abled wear.
Oh, well, I was not aware.
So sorry. Sorry, Lee.
No, it's okay. I was thinking about that there's a certain benefit to locking some of that down, particularly in the education use case. I wasn't thinking higher ed, Sam. I'm thinking the lower ed, where you really need them to not mess with the computers for their own well-being. But fortunately, you can turn it off.
In corporate land, we talk about locking down computers all the time. Don't allow them to do this. I've said this, I can't tell you how many times in the last few months, of why do you allow Facebook on the corporate laptops? Like, well, why shouldn't we? Because
why should you? This is a work computer, not a Facebook computer.
But I allow solitaire.
What if you work for Meta though?
All right,
wait a minute.
Then you should be metaverse.
If we're locking down
just went all meta.
Oh God, that was actually really good, Lee. If we're locking down computers in corporate world for the locking down to protect them and to make our lives easier, and Microsoft has done the same overall and allowed you to get out of that, so that if you are a power user, you can get out of that mode.
Yeah,
is it so wrong?
Right.
My instinctual answer is, oh my God, that's horrible. But that's because I like to think of myself as at least a semi-power user, and I think most of us would.
Right.
Okay. Some of us are, and some of us aren't. But instinctively, it's like, no, it's my computer. I own it. I have root. It's mine. You can't lock it down. It's mine. But
at our age, Josh, we got to be happy with the semi power user status. That's what I'm saying.
Well,
They have pills for
you
that.
know, the other thing that's cool is that in this day and age, it is really nearly trivial to provide somebody a functional virtual environment to try some crazy shit in. It doesn't cost a whole lot, whereas back when we were, 15 years ago, it was a pain in the butt to do that. So maybe there's another way you can, take off the limits, but it's not on the physical computer. It's something virtual.
I just want to change gears and pose a question. How much do you folks trust CVE?
For what?
Yeah.
For
Scoring?
evaluating the severity and impact of a particular vulnerability and prioritizing the remediation effort in your environment.
I have a good friend that is comparing the different ways of scoring them, and they keep coming up with different scores. So I'm going to say, based on this good friend's advice, I don't trust it anymore.
So
now, I'm not saying it's totally wrong.
So
This is interesting. So I don't want to give too much away because I want to
clarify. I want to clarify.
Yeah.
CVE versus CVSS.
Good point.
Because CVE is arguably the disclosure. CVSS is the scoring method. Am I wrong in that?
Correct.
So how?
No, you're
correct. So the correct question would be: how much do you trust CVSS?
Well, you also have to trust CVE in the descriptions that they put, and trust the scoring.
Right.
Now, but you also have to.
So we had this conversation last week about it's privilege escalation.
Yeah, I'm exactly
when it's actually remote code execution because you went from no privileges to having privileges.
Give you a little sneak preview. It hasn't been accepted at a conference yet, but I put together an outline for an entire talk on CVE and vulnerability disclosure. So I've been thinking a lot about this lately, and it still keeps cropping up in the news like in my story number one. So in my story number one, they discovered, so there was CVEs that described vulnerabilities in ASS routers. Now, in these disclosures, I don't know how, you can calculate the score, like Larry said, is separate, right? The description of the vulnerability is the CVE portion. Now, also keep in mind that anyone can issue a CVE, and anyone can score via CVSS and publish the scores, right? So, this post makes a very crucial point and gives evidence. So the exploitability of vulnerabilities may depend on the environment. So researchers found that when emulating firmware, the remote code execution vulnerabilities are exploitable pre-authentication. A very, very important distinction. Yes, a piece of software may have a remote code execution vulnerability, or 12, but can it be exploited pre or post authentication is a huge distinction.
Yep, because one, arguably one is RCE, the other one might be privilege escalation.
In this particular case, it was listed in CVE as pre-authenticated remote code execution. Oh, crap. That's something I should probably pay attention to, right?
However, 9.8 to 9.9 to 10, right?
However, due to the NVRAM differences in emulated versus physical devices, the devices are not exploitable without authentication. Because, technical reasons they go into, there's a certain flag in NVRAM that gets set on physical devices that you have to manually set in emulation mode. But in emulation mode, you're setting flags so that stuff doesn't crash and that it runs, not necessarily for the production environment. So basically in emulation mode, this flag is 0. In physical mode, this flag is 1. And the value of this flag makes it exploitable either via pre or post authentication.
Interesting.
So whoever reported the vulnerability and evaluated the vulnerability, they said this is pre-authentication because they were evaluating that running in emulation. So that was the findings in this post. Also,
interesting.
The researchers, if you're into firmware security research, like Larry and I and many others are, they ported the NVRAM emulation from Firmware to Keeling, which is kind of impressive. And I hope they'd put together a pull request, but in a quick glance, I couldn't find one because I thought that was kind of interesting. Because anytime you emulate firmware, you also have to emulate NVRAM. Firmware does that. Keeling didn't do that. I don't know if it didn't do it well, or didn't do it for the platform, so they ported it over, which I thought was interesting. So this means we can't trust what's in a CVE entry as the CVE entries called this remote code execution with no authentication. Not true for physical devices. Interesting. Very interesting.
Yeah.
Because the validation process is somewhat broken. There's so many CVEs being reported.
Yep.
Who's validating all of that data, and what level of validation is it going through? Now, my story number one is a very, very in-depth exercise in validation. Not every vulnerability gets that level of scrutiny, quite frankly.
Right.
So how much can we trust what's being published throughout the CVE process, right? Whether that's the description, whether that's the platform, whether that's the CVSS score, whether that's the, where do you want to go from here? You want to go to the EPSS score?
Mm-hmm.
My story number 11. So the EPSS is the, what is that called? The exploitability, exploit prediction scoring system.
Yep.
I'm also a little, I'm a little like jaded on this one too, and highly skeptical, because when we look at this Jenkins flaw, so if you spent 30 seconds looking at the security news this week, you saw the headlines that read exploitable Jenkins flaws.
Yep. 30,000 exploitable servers still available on the internet.
Right. Now, reading all those things, it may take you a lot more than 30 seconds to come to the conclusion that it was discovered by Sonar Research or whatever, right? And they have a vulnerability disclosure timeline, which is my other like kind of nitpicky thing. Like when we disclose a vulnerability, especially when it's getting a ton of press, we should be privy to, like, this should be published with the CVE. What was the disclosure process? I want to know, when was this vulnerability discovered? When was it acknowledged by the vendor? When is the patch going to be released?
Yep.
When was the CVE created? When was it published? When was the patch published? Like, there's so many more dates that aren't published.
And arguably, based on some of your earlier conversation, if anybody can publish a CVE, you can publish a CVE and the vendor might not even know until
Correct.
there's a CVE published.
Correct. Because you can just go to
Oh, it's worse than that, Larry. You can publish a CVE that has no details.
Right.
It's just a placeholder.
Correct. I have another story on that. But what's interesting about that is I don't want to suggest that we regulate that too much. Like, I don't want a situation where only the vendor of that software, the owner of that software, can authorize and publish a CVE.
Yeah,
because we would be in a very bad place. Right? We would be a very bad place if that were the case. Now, the EPSS score, from what I understand, is like a 0 to 100, or like a 0 to 100 kind of score, right?
Yep.
Okay.
The EPSS for the Jenkins CVE 2024-23897 is 0.0066, right?
Wait, do me a favor. Say that again, because I must have misheard you.
No,
So,
you didn't mishear him.
I don't know if
it's a 0.3066.
I was actually kind of struggling with like how the EPSS is actually scored. Is it 0 to 100, or is it a?
I think it's 1.
Is it a floating point?
I think the
like
most
a
is
floating
1.
point from 0 to 1 is how it's
I think
scored.
it's 0. I think it's 0 to 1.
I think it's 0 to 1. So this would be like a 0.6%.
No, it can't be 0 to 1.
No, see, I'm very confused as to how it's scored. Because I saw some other ones that were like, there's a 67% chance that there is a exploit.
Well, 60% chance is 0.60.
It's really hard to. I thought I had this.
Okay, so it's an estimate of the probability of exploitation activity,
Correct.
which means that it's going to go between 0 and 1. It's not going to go to 100.
Okay, so this one was
0.00066.
Is what I thought.
0.00066.
Yes.
Yep.
Much less than 1. I mean, basically, think of it as a percentage.
Yes.
So two decimal points over.
0.066%.
This is this would be a very low probability of an exploit being used or existing. Correct? From what we understand about EPSS, and someone can correct us on that.
Yeah, of exploitation activity being observed over the next 30 days.
Okay. There are, for CVE 2024-23897, 10 exploits on GitHub for it. 10 exploits on GitHub which leads me to believe that the EPSS score should be significantly higher than the score that I observed in being scored in the wild.
Right.
Yeah.
That's my point. People can you can validate this. This is all public. This is all public information. You're going to score it yourself, but maybe someone didn't take into account that there's 10. I linked to them in the show notes. There are 10 exploits. I also want to caveat this with, if you go to the links of all those 10 exploits, I make no claims as to what kind of code you're downloading, right? Like, so you could get owned. It could work. It could not work.
It could not be an exploit, and it only owns
I want to
you.
make a distinction here. When I say like you could get owned, that doesn't mean that like you're going to own your own Jenkins server. What I'm saying is if you download this exploit, that exploit could own your machine that you're running the exploit from, completely independent and mutually exclusively of pawning whatever target Jenkins server that you're going after, right? So just put that out there. Like, buyer beware. This is free. You're running someone else's code in your system. If you haven't looked through it to make sure it wasn't going to harm you, that's on you, not me. I just gave you the links to go run the exploit, which there are 10.
Right. Well,
and this
Your mileage
should be.
may vary. Act now. Supplies are limited.
This should be.
Please keep your hands and arms inside the vehicle at all times.
This should be a much higher. Like, this exploit is out there in times 10, being covered in mainstream press. Why you should patch your Jenkins server? Like, but if you're looking at like the numbers and the scores, I think it's CVSS was like scored at 8.8 by someone, so it didn't even cross the 9. Is 9 the threshold for critical? Is critical 9?
No. Critical 7, isn't it?
Is it 7? No. Critical is 9 or above. I thought
9 or above. Okay, sorry.
so
What is it? High is 7 to
CVE
8.9.
Yeah.
CVE 2024 23898 is 8, and it's a high. 897 is a 7.5, and it's also a high.
I'm not sure why this
There's
isn't
also
critical.
some good data linked in the NVD site. There are 2 links to some stuff at Jenkins Security Advisory that actually has even a link to a script you can do to test your to see if you're vulnerable. It's not an exploit. It's a test to see if you're exploitable. Those 2 are nice things on the NVD site.
Yeah. My question will be, CVSS is pretty static. They do an evaluation, they give it a score. How dynamic is EPSS over time? So at the time EPSS was evaluated, it may have been 0.00066. What is it now? Has that EPSS score changed over time, and how dynamic is it?
Well, how often does CVSS get updated? Would be my question.
We're not talking CVSS here. We're talking EPSS, because CVSS is pretty much static.
EPSS claims to update daily, but it is done by machine learning, so they don't really know. So it's looking at the reports and catching phrases and trying to guess from that how likely it is to be exploited. So it sounds pretty unreliable.
They need a better GPT model.
It seems like a questionable application of machine learning, actually. Anyway.
Yeah. So that's my question now. Like, at the time when this article was written and when we did the research, maybe EPSS 0.00066 was appropriate, but if we look at that today, knowing that there's 10, maybe EPSS is 0.90.
It claims to include publicly available exploit code, but it looks in exploit, DB, GitHub, and Metasploit. So I wonder if we can get the current rating of this thing. It should be higher now that there's public exploit code.
Yeah, I mean, this exploit code was like last week. What it says in Git, the first one there.
Interesting.
I question this whole thing. And the other thing with CVSS is how often is it recalculated? Who recalculates it? Because
Never.
But anyone can calculate a CVSS and plug the stuff in. I've personally seen, and I'll talk about this in my talk if it gets accepted somewhere, that there are situations where the company that found the vulnerability does their CVSS calculations. The vendor who owns the software does their CVSS calculations. NVD does their own CVSS calculations, and you get 3 different scores. 3 completely different scores.
Interesting.
So what am I supposed to do? We don't average those together. That's not how the math works here. That's not. This is not.
So looking at CVEdetails.com for this particular CVE for Jenkins, it says the EPSS score is 0.07.
Yes. Okay. So
Not 0.000066, 0.07.
right. I was going to say I did find a different score.
Yeah.
Now, did they? I wonder. Did they do their own scoring, or did they? Is that an updated score from first?
But either way, the EPSS score history for this, there is no history, meaning it hasn't changed.
All right, so we're still talking about a low probability, but not quite as low. Am I hearing that correctly, Larry?
That was my assessment, Josh. Yep. I came to the same
And
conclusion. I
CVE
still think it's too low. There's 10 friggin' exploits out there for it. The major news outlets are talking about this is a vulnerability, it's exploitable, and exploits exist in the wild. But why are all these scores higher? I mean, maybe there's something where it's not as exploitable. Maybe certain conditions have to be met before it's exploitable. I don't know. I haven't read through all the exploit code or whatever, but I don't understand why. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice with this stuff, right?
Yeah, super crazy too. So looking at CVEdetails.com, they had the CVE rated as a 6.8. NIST at NVD has it rated as a 7.5.
Right. So do you need to, for every vulnerability, if you work as a defender for an enterprise, you need to go calculate your own CVSS score, which there's a template for, where you can also put compensating controls.
Yep.
Maybe to Sam's point, you adopt your own AI model that you train based on your environment to calculate CVSS scores for you.
Well, I wouldn't do that.
I wouldn't do that either. I would just lower my standards and patch my stuff. I mean, in everything we've talked about in the context of this conversation, and we can say that all day long and sit in our pulpits and go, you should just patch more stuff, and that sounds great, but like in practice, that's way harder than us sitting here on a podcast drinking and going, yeah, you should do that.
So here's another fun one. Vulners.com. Okay. Same CVE. It is rated a 7.5 high, using CVSS version 3. Their AI score is a 6.8. Their CVSS 2 is a 5 medium, and their EPSS is 0.001.
No, wait. Something's wrong there. Something significantly wrong there. That doesn't correlate right. Like, even at first glance, that doesn't feel right.
Well, all the sources
You know what it is, Josh? Everyone can do their own research. That's what we're coming down to. Everyone can do their own research.
Oh.
And research could be, whatever.
If we can't even Paul, but wait, if we can't even agree on how to fucking score a vulnerability based on exploitability and impact, which is like two fucking factors, man. 2 fucking factors, okay? If we can't agree on how to score something based on 2 factors, then how the hell do we expect to speak intelligibly about risk?
Right. How do we speak intelligibly? Is intelligibly a word? It is now.
Yes.
How do we speak intelligibly about risk, given everything we've discussed thus far about all of these different scoring mechanisms, all of the different things in CVE, not in CVE, CVSS, and EPSS?
I think
again, you just patch your shit. Go ahead, Sam.
I think these scores represent like a worst case scenario, like the one you started with a while ago, where there's a firmware exploit, but only if you actually are running an emulator is it full remote code execution.
No, in a way. Yes, you're correct. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead.
You can say that if it has a low score, then you probably don't need to worry, because that means even under optimal conditions you couldn't get in. But if you have a high score, then you might have a mitigating control that means it doesn't matter in your environment, and that requires judgment.
But also, I don't want people to get hung up on if it has a low score because there's exploitability is not there, an exploit doesn't exist, therefore we need to patch it. Like, and then one day you wake up and there is an exploit, and now you're scrambling. I have a list of examples of that I plan to present in my talk as well. So,
Well, of course. I mean, the main point of the thing is to take your vuln scanner that gives you too many results and let you pick out the most important ones to look at. And I think it approximately does that. It's just you have to understand how little these scores actually mean. I mean, that's why they pay us so much. You know, you need a human to judge it. I often think of a medical exam. You do a blood test, you get these levels of chemicals, and you need an experienced doctor to tell you, does this really matter that I'm a little above the recommended level for this thing?
yeah, I mean, then you can also talk about, I don't want to like give my whole presentation on the show, but my story number 6 also speaks of shortcomings in this process where, again, I don't want to go into too much detail, but like basically you got a WordPress plugin and someone finds a vulnerability and submits a CVE for it. That is not the author or maintainer of this WordPress plugin, just to be clear. They submit a vulnerability, they get a CVE assigned to them from MITRE. Inside of this description, they say version 2.0 and all versions prior are vulnerable. When, however, that feature that is vulnerable was introduced in version 2.0 and is fixed in 2.1. So now we're kind of, how do we manage risk when you're not even really vulnerable? You're version 1.8. You're like, shit, I gotta patch, but you're not really vulnerable because no one's checking.
Well, you probably need to patch for some other reason. I'd say realistically, you want to be on the latest version. So, I mean, that is an error, but realistically, if you're at this version,
do we always need to be on the latest version? There's people still out there running Windows 3.11, Sam. Like,
yeah, but nobody thinks of that as a secure practice. I mean,
I
they're
know,
doing
but
that.
like I used to be in the camp of I got to be on the latest version for everything. And like younger version of Paul was like, we always got to upgrade and be in the latest version because that's the right thing to do. Older version of Paul is like, wow, that can create some major friggin' headaches. And I got a lot of gray in my beard. And a lot of this gray in my beard you're seeing right now is because I tried to update everything to the latest versions and create chaos.
I certainly agree with you there. You have to test before you update. But the thing to be aware of is if you don't update, then you have a risk.
Yes.
And you have to have some kind of mitigating for that.
But if you update, there's also a risk to that as well.
That's right. I mean, I'm having this argument with one of the companies I consult for now. They have software, and the vendor only updates it quarterly. So it's always full of vulnerabilities in the operating system that comes with it. And they're trying to say we have to somehow pressure the vendor into updating it more frequently. And I said, well, or you could isolate it behind a isolating device like a VPN concentrator. And there's an argument over whether it's good enough. But I mean, this is often the case that you have some vulnerable thing that for some reason or another you can't update or patch, and you have to put a control outside it.
But as you add more controls like VPN concentrators, now you're adding more attack surface to your network and theoretically increasing risk.
Right.
Yeah.
Well,
so I added a NetScaler in front of it, and then I got ransomware because I didn't update my NetScaler. Shit.
Well, but you can at least update the NetScaler, presumably.
Right. At least
you got one more thing to update, but then you have to kick off all your VPN users.
But you can at least have a plan to update your NetScaler like much more frequently than you could for this.
I think I think the mitigating control and the risk mitigation is largely in having the plan in place to how you, to Sam's point, test the update and roll out the update. I think we get too hung up on, crap, do I need to update? Do I not need to update? But what we're coming down to is you, like, operationally, you need to employ excellence in your update process, because all the things we've talked about in this context are like, holy crap, there's way too many variables to really truly understand risk. So we just need an awesome plan to not only just update, but be able to back out and update as well. I'll give you an example. So I just did this with my kernel, right? So when I update my kernels, and there's vulnerabilities, it's actually one of my stories in here, which is relevant. It's my story number 2, right? So you keep a certain number of versions of the kernel on your system. So on some of my systems, I think I go back to 5.15, a 6.1, and a 6.6, right? And I configure grubs. Okay. I configure grubs, so I got the menu, so I can choose. So if I go in and I boot a kernel, bad things happen, I can like reboot and I can choose a different kernel, right? And so those are all compiled, installed, and available on my system. And I pick and choose, and I make sure I maintain 3 on each of my systems that I can go between. So I have a backup plan. My concern with specifically the Linux kernel here is there was an IPv6 vulnerability that was fixed in kernel version 6.7-RC7. And I'm like, hold on, wait a minute. I run Manjaro, right, on both my systems, 2 of my systems.
Do you do CrossFit too?
I do CrossFit, and I'm vegan, and I run Linux.
Are you vegan?
Yes, yeah, vegan, run Linux, the whole thing, right? So, but 6.7, I'm like, you're like bleeding edge at that point. I don't know how nerdy you guys get with like the Linux kernel, right? But like, there's how much on the bleeding edge do you want to, like, the bleeding edge is sharp and you're going to cut yourself kind of thing.
Right.
So I tend to go like a little bit back, but then there's advantages, some of those being security, some of those being performance, some of those being functionality in the later kernels. And so if the fix for this is in 6.7 and I'm running Manjaro, which is a rolling release, and it has 6.7 available, and guess what? Manjaro in their interface goes, that's not LTS and it's not recommended. Like, yeah, it's out there. You can do it. And I'm like, yeah, but I don't want to do it. If you're not telling me it's recommended or LTS, like, I don't want to do it. I don't want to do it.
Like, I get to use the system.
Yeah. And so
Well,
like,
you're jumping into a different aspect of your risk.
that's
back when we
operational
were
risk. Yeah.
Run the latest thing of all the things. We don't care what breaks. Now we want something that's integration tested. We want the components that are not going to give us an expensive brick when we're done.
Right. And this is a ridiculous scenario where on this laptop right here that I have in front of me, if I was on kernel version 5.15 and my screen brightness display buttons work perfectly. If I went to any newer kernel other than that, my screen brightness displays didn't work. And I was like, and I just kept testing it and researching it and all that stuff. But the reason it worked in 5.15 is because my grub kernel parameters had specific parameters that allowed it to work. When I went to the newer version of the kernel, my screen brightness didn't work until, I'm talking about like months of Paul on and off.
Parameters back?
Yeah, months of Paul on and off, like troubleshooting this problem, reading a bunch of forums and the whole thing. Finally today, I was like, you know what? What if I take out all of the kernel parameters that I had in Grub that would address this problem, and I just took them out? And then I booted the latest version of the kernel 6.6, and lo and behold, everything worked. Like, the fix in 5.15 was the breaking thing in the new kernels, and I need to get all that stuff out of there. And then lo and behold, now
that blows.
But now I'm running kernel version 6.6, and then I read this vulnerability report, and I'm like, shit, I'm still vulnerable. And then I'm like, what if there's a workaround? And then I looked at the workaround, and the workaround's like, oh, you need to mitigate this risk by ensuring the accept_RA parameter is disabled, which can be verified in proc_sysnet IPv6 conf default accept RA. And guess what? When I checked that setting was enabled, and I'm still vulnerable. Now
on Windows, would add antivirus or an IDS on the outside of this. Is there anything like that you can do to have a layer of defense that you can update, even if you can't update the underlying OS?
Yeah, I mean, Linux, you've got like App Armor and other such things. There's BPF monitoring thing. I mean, there are similar kind of things in Linux to do that kind of stuff, Sam, right? Or if you dig in the nitty-gritty technical details, right? There's a setting in proc that I can change, right? So, there's that. So that was my experience with, am I vulnerable? Am I not vulnerable? Do I patch? Do I not patch?
The bottom line of all is that you really can't have a simple strategy. You actually have to have experienced security experts guiding your plan here. It's just never going to be simple, like put on automatic updates and update everything all the time or anything like that.
Yeah.
Agreed wholeheartedly.
Paul, I got one to cover if you don't mind.
Let's do it.
It is I apologize for the crappy link. It is my number 1 Hackaday links from January 28th. Specifically the first 2 paragraphs of this Hackaday links, entitled "No Good Deed Goes Unpublished." Effectively, what happened here is that a gentleman was retained by a company to look into a database problem with performance problems and so forth. And
They make a pill for that.
yes, exactly. So they hired
Alright, good
they hired the pill, and so the consultant comes in, starts looking at this stuff, finds out that this database is being filled with logs from a third party service. This third party service has is filling the log server. He looks at this application, finds that there's usernames and passwords in it, connects to the remote database that is flooding theirs, and finds that there's all sorts of other customer data in this database that shouldn't be there. And so now this consultant that went to go troubleshoot a problem, that found a password in part of troubleshooting this problem, and connected to the database and found all this other stuff as part of their troubleshooting stuff, is now being effectively prosecuted for inappropriately accessing systems and so forth and so on. And that the German laws are saying that merely looking at and using the password constituted a criminal offense.
Yeah.
Jesus
Same thing's true.
Christmas. Are you serious?
CFA was the same thing, and I've faced accusations for exactly this. If you connect to a system and gain knowledge of something you're not supposed to have, that can be interpreted as a violation of the CFAA. There's nothing there about passing through any barrier.
But don't you have permission?
No, I mean, if I go to, what I did was I found a website that was just published all their hospital data, all their medical data, just openly on an FTP server. And I told them, and so they turned it off, and then they started reporting me as a hacker that had attacked them. And I talked to my lawyer, and my lawyer said, well, you could make a CFAA violation out of that. You connect to a server, and you gain information you're not supposed to have. There was no password barrier or anything, but the CFAA doesn't say anything about that. It just says if you make a request to a server, and you gain information you're not authorized to have, you have now broken the CFAA.
That's crazy. I mean, same sort of thing, Sam. Many years ago, I was referred to on the local news station as an anonymous source because one of our local police departments on their police blotter had people that had arrest records, and as part of those arrest records on the police station's website, on their police blotter, had name, birthday, and social security numbers of the people that had been arrested.
No.
And I called him up and said, dude,
What?
like, what are you doing? And that could be constituted as a CFAA violation because I made a request to a server and got information that I shouldn't have.
Well, because don't forget the CFAA Title 18, right, was written in the 80s.
Right.
Yep.
And in the 80s, there wasn't a lot of these fancy access controls. You had a computer that was connected to a phone line. And if you connected to said computer and got information, that's what the
hacking.
lone hackers did in their basements back in the 80s, because that was kind of like the air quote scene back then. So they had to have a law that said, don't do that. Well, I mean, 40 plus years later, things are way different now.
Well, but to be fair, this is why you have trials and you have lawyers. If, like in my case, if you get a lawyer and you cooperate with your lawyer, then you can probably escape punishment in court by claiming that what you did was reasonable and fair use.
Because it's intent. It's intent, Sam. And I don't know that the law necessarily speaks to this, but any legal process, at least here in the U.S., is more than likely going to take that into account. That, look, I didn't steal this data. I didn't resell the data. I didn't profit from the data. And
I realized this is a problem and I reported it right away.
And I reported it. Yep. So there was no malicious intent. So you're hard pressed to prosecute that person. Yeah. But again, I'm not a lawyer.
And in this case, this one was in Germany, and Germany for a number of years has a problem with quote hacking and intent.
Yeah.
Because they had the German anti-hacking laws, where if you were
hacking tools were
if you even had a hacking tool, even if you were using it as a hired pen tester that was providing results for the customer to improve, there was no concept of intent in any of these laws. They updated it many years later to have that intent. Like, I could have gone a number of years ago into Germany and to teach wireless hacking with the Kali distribution we've had, and I could have been arrested for possession of hacker tools.
Correct.
Regardless of whether the fact that I was there to teach people how to use these tools for good and not for
right.
evil.
Right.
So Germany's had a little bit of issue with intent over the years. So
cool. Where do we want to go from here?
next, something from Lee.
Something from
So I had
Lee.
a couple out there that I was thinking about you guys with.
Lee, your story number 3. We had a little discussion or a little rant in the Slack channel about.
Yeah, actually, that was one of the ones I thought about because this is one where as basically a school. Actually, what there's a trend as they're going more and more schools, they're getting hacked, and what's happening? A lot of them are actually trying to hire professional services to secure them. And in this case, there are a few schools that the services that were provided to help secure them were themselves insecure, and they got compromised, which is like, hello. And the killer is, as I remember, schools, their budgets are razor thin at the most.
Yeah.
So they're not going to sit there and hire a security team. And so you've got to find free expertise. And not every security professional is able to come help their school and their neighborhood, without some compensation.
Yeah.
So to me, I thought it was an interesting scenario. How do you help somebody like this within their budget without pointing that something questionable at them, right? Because and they're just trying to get the job done, right? They're just trying to get environments for students to learn in, better ways to process their information, and the old cliche of Matthew Broderick hacking the grading system shouldn't happen. But guess what?
Yep. So
and that's an interesting point. The grading system we all hacked. Let's be honest. And back in the day, it was if they found out, it was hey, damn kid, can you help us fix things up now? Okay, sure, no problem.
Can you help keep you out?
Right. Yep. Now it's you're going to jail, straight to jail. Don't pass go. Don't collect $200.
Yep.
Zero tolerance.
Ouch.
We have a lot of horrible habits these days.
Sam, you had a comment in there.
Yeah, I'm thinking probably the best thing for schools would be to use cloud services managed by somebody else. That would be the obvious way to avoid this responsibility.
My rant on this was, wait a minute. They closed schools because of a cyber attack. And my question was, did the bus company pick the kids up in the morning without a computer? Did the bus company drop the kids off at the school without a computer? Could the teachers tell who showed up at their classroom and who was missing without a computer and probably write that down and send a little note to the office? Did the clocks in the classroom run without a compuder? And if they
have you seen the clocks in schools?
And if they didn't,
they're the same as when we went to school, which was a long time ago.
Does the teacher have a watch or a cell phone that tells the time? Could the teacher hand out papers or pass out some books and modify their lesson plan a little bit to not require a computer and use a whiteboard?
How do they print? How do they print if their laptop is ransomware?
Why do they need to print? I'm sure they've got something in their lesson plan that they could take down to the photocopier.
Yeah, but their lesson plan is on their laptop.
But they
It's been ransomware.
Okay.
We can. Yeah, I'm with Larry. There's workarounds. This is, how do you do continuity when the computers aren't around?
Yeah,
not unique to schools.
More importantly, like, to me, those were probably easy problems to solve because I went to school without computers.
Yeah, but we all did.
But what's the backup plan for these?
That I will agree with. I think depending on how pervasive the ransomware is, if they got it,
I don't even know if it was ransomware. They said it was a cyber attack. So,
but let's just go with the worst case scenario. The teachers don't have access to their computers.
Right.
In today's day and age, makes it very difficult at particularly the high school level.
Sure.
I know from visiting my son's high school, it seemed to me that the teachers were very reliant on their computing devices to be able to present
Agreed.
to the students, right?
Agreed.
And so that, not to say that you can't work around that, not to say that you shouldn't have a contingency plan. I'm all for that. I totally in 100% agreement. There should be like a threat model and a contingency plan when all these teachers take these professional development days like they do here in Rhode Island.
Yep.
One of the things you should be talking about in your professional development days, and I love you teachers and you teach my children, and don't take that as an offense.
Absolutely.
My recommendation is during one of those sessions, you should be talking about what if
My computer doesn't work.
we don't have the computing infrastructure for whatever reason that it is? It could be someone's computer crashed for the day. How do I teach some?
Yeah.
How do I teach some?
It's not teaching. It's not teaching.
It's a business
emergency
continuity plan.
notification.
Yeah, it's a business
It's
continuity.
emergency notification. If a kid gets sick and they're unconscious, the record of how to contact their next of kin, their parent, their mom,
is
their
on the
dad,
computer.
their grandma, whatever, is on the computer. That's where the problem. Sorry, I was thinking
No, it
through all
could
the
be.
different
But-
processes.
Yeah, so it's not. You're right. It could not so much be.
but
again,
But again,
we're gonna go
what's your
back to-
business continuity
You gotta
plan?
have a business continuity plan.
Right.
Valid,
Didn't you
valid,
plan
valid.
for that?
I mean, I'm
Right.
sorry. I was at my kid's elementary school not that long ago, and there were filing cabinets there. Like, what's in them? Computers?
That's where the teachers keep their booze that they drink in between classes.
Seriously,
That's where they keep all the contraband they can confiscate.
That's right.
And I'm telling you right now, at the beginning of every school year, we did not go online and fill it for our elementary school. So New Jersey, in this case, it was elementary school and middle school that got canceled because of this.
Oh, okay. So it wasn't.
So maybe less reliance on the students, but we have an elementary school kid, and I can tell you at the beginning of every school year, we did not go online and fill out a form. No, they sent home paper. And we wrote on paper and sent it via backpack mail back to school.
Yeah.
Well,
Where
I
the
want to
fuck's the
say
paper? Sorry.
this problem will soon be gone because we're all going to have chips in our brain that Elon Musk put there, and you won't have ever a lack of computers again.
Until the chip in your brain gets ransomware. Did you watch the Amazon? You know what's funny? We were having a conversation about the movie Her, Ex Machina. But the one that I think flies under the radar the most is the Amazon TV show that I think had maybe 2 seasons called The Feed.
Yeah, it was. This one was kind of like like a spin-off of a Black Mirror.
Yeah,
type of
it
thing.
was very Black Mirror stylistically.
I have not watched it because my wife is not into that kind of thing, so I've got to watch
but
it.
Sam,
at some
it's
point.
exactly what you're talking about. No one has a smartphone. They have an implant in their brain that gives you augmented reality.
Sign me up.
And it's your smartphone. I don't know if you watch The Feed, you may not say sign me up. I mean, they don't present it in a.
They just had the first Neuralink installation.
Yep, that's where we were going with that.
Is that Apple's new Vision 2 or whatever?
No,
it is?
that's the Elon Musk thing. Yep.
Elon Musk.
Yep.
It's funny. We saw a commercial, and for is the Apple Vision 2? Is that their new?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, it's not the.
And my wife was like, "Oh, I don't like the Meta the Quest that we have." I'm like, "Well, this is way
above.
beyond. Like our tech is 3 years old at this point, which in VR stuff is ancient.
Yep.
Right? This is Apple's thing. They haven't even released yet. I'm like, you may actually like wearing one of these.
But
it's going to be like, what is it, like $3 or $4 grand?
It's $3,500.
Wow.
It's relatively heavy. It has an external battery pack that you have to put in your pocket, which is relatively heavy. And from what I've seen,
Can you put Linux on it?
The AR is, I mean, it's cool because it's augmented reality. It's got its first gen product.
Yeah.
Wait 2 or 3 generations, especially at $3,500.
Is that like the Google Glass? Was it Google Glass?
It was. I would argue it's
And Microsoft HoloLens.
HoloLens.
I've worn a HoloLens.
Yeah,
before.
like because Russell Bushman brought one in, and I'm like, I would sign up for HoloLens like now, but like the HoloLens, the HoloLens that Russell brought in was $10,000.
Yeah,
at the time, and that was 5 years ago, if not more.
No, they actually, by the way, Paul, Google Glass was a flop in large scale. However, they still sell them. There's a lot of differently abled groups, people in groups that use them for various reasons.
Oh, interesting. So they found a market for it. Yeah.
Okay. Kind of niche.
Yeah. A very nice market.
Good.
Yeah.
I mean, I would love some of that type of stuff. Given that, we're not getting any younger and my vision is not getting any better. and that at some point I will probably need some type of assistive devices.
Yeah. You know what's funny? There's a lot of discussions in my groups I'm in about the movie Hackers. And they're always talking about what does Johnny Lee Miller wear in the final scenes. He has that, but it's a modified. It's a Hollywood version. It's based on an actual device, but it's been modified for. And there's people that like seek out that kind of gear and stuff. And the Plague uses some kind of virtual reality. But it's all 1995 tech, and then some of that tech existed back then.
Lawnmower Man.
Lawnmower Man.
Yeah,
I gotta go back and watch Lawnmower Man.
Underappreciated hacker movie, Lawnmower Man.
Agreed. If Hackers is the best, Lawnmower Man may be the least most
underappreciated. Yeah.
I don't know. Who am I?
Josh is not a fan of Lawnmower Man. He's over there yawning.
Josh, have you seen the German film Who Am I?
No.
That's as far as entries into the hacker movie genre and talking about underappreciated, and mostly because it was a German film and access to it is not as widespread as some of the other, American-made films. I watched it a few weeks ago. Really, really good.
You need to put a link. Good. You need to put a link to that in Slack or Discord.
Because where did I watch it though? The reason I watched it is because it came up on one of the streaming things. I don't remember which one I watched it on.
Venture to guess, Netflix.
Might have been Netflix. Netflix might have actually picked it up.
So,
hey, Paul, beer me while Lee's going.
You want
on the other hand of the side of the spectrum, have you seen The Beekeeper yet?
No.
Oh my God, that has nothing to do with technology, except it does.
No.
I mean, it's about freaking getting even. It's lovely. I like that part.
Jason
I'd
Stratham.
love to do that to some of those scammers.
Jason Stratham.
And it's completely out of whack, but it's a Jason Stratham movie.
I saw like the preview or something for that. I don't forget how I saw it. And the part that was awesome. Like it was the revenge thing, but the part that I was so disappointed with is the scene where they tie somebody's leg to a truck and they run the truck off the bridge. And I'm like, oh my God, that is a beautiful classic truck. Don't destroy it.
Oh yeah. Well, actually, this is totally off topic, but Larry, I watched an old movie not long ago, like black and white gangster movie. Okay. Yeah. And they threw a Packard in the river. And I was just like, no. We only knew that would be 50 years.
Yeah. Yep.
Oh,
yes, Paul.
Larry. Yeah. Jason Ostrom. Does that name ring a bell?
Yeah, from Sands.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But wasn't he the dude that did the voice over IP security podcast back in the day?
Oh, man, maybe.
Back in the day. I'm pretty sure Jason was the guy. Loved that. It was a whole podcast back in the.
What story of this is yours? Is it related
my story
to?
Number 4? It's kind of like versions of the Matrix. Like I feel like if you podcasting, you could kind of talk about like versions of the Matrix. Like there was one version of the Matrix in podcasting world where at that point in time, having a podcast on voice over IP security was a thing, and it was awesome.
Yeah,
it was awesome. And I feel like things change, and we didn't necessarily need a whole. I don't know. We didn't need a whole podcast on VoIP security, or people found it interesting. There was a whole SANS class at that time that taught by Eric Cole that I took on voice over IP security.
So the crazy thing is that just this week alone, I have seen a number of videos that may have been published before, and or stories where PSTN is making a resurgence.
Interesting.
In implementation effective. So there was one, and I forget the conference, where this guy was able to acquire a whole bunch of Cisco gear, and it was either in London or England or in the UK or in Europe, in broader Europe. Got a bunch of Cisco gear that could deliver analog telephone, and he built this stuff and brought it to camp. Like literally camp. It was a hacker camp, and they ran wire to tents. And they had public areas at the bar where people could bring and plug in their old analog phone devices.
Wow.
Like the highest content of they track the number of calls that were placed on the network, and the highest count of calls were fax machines. And they had some really crazy stuff that people brought in, like old UK like teletype terminals and rotary dial phones. Like they had to find, as part of that, they knew what was going to happen when they built this network. They had to find a way to enable rotary dial telephones, and there was patches available. And so like the guy you showed us on YouTube, like he put in an audio patch to put in the DVRs for satellite that actually had to dial to a service, and he put in an audio patch so we could hear the modem sounds.
Wow.
Like there's been like this nostalgia about PSTN.
But Jason has moved on past VoIP apparently, and had a stellar career at SANS, and recently released automated emulation. It's a develop infrastructure security lab to enhance skills in adversary emulation, focusing on linking TTPs and evaluating various endpoint security products. It's like an AWS Terraform that you can spin up in an environment.
This is fantastic.
It's pretty cool. So it's he says he envisions this as a customizable security playground for personal skill enhancement. I haven't seen or talked to Jason in years, and it could be a good opportunity to bring him. Not that we need an excuse, but we should bring Jason back on the show to talk about it, because the last time, if you looked in the Security Weekly history, last time Jason was on the show, he was probably talking about VoIP, and that was probably more than 10 years ago. So
yeah, we totally need to get him on soon. Having worked previously worked for SANS as a cloud engineer, developing cyber agents. Ostrom uses Terraform, so maybe no longer with SANS. Automated emulation research is a new SANS class, Sec 598, security automation for offense, defense, and cloud. So maybe we're still with SANS based on. Okay, interesting.
I want to talk about time anymore.
I want to talk about a couple more vulnerability shenanigans. My story number 10. Zixel VPN series pre-auth remote code execution. This is I think different from the one that was used to attack Denmark industrial control systems. What struck me about this advisory is that they stated, due to the recent attack surface changes in Zixel, the chain described below broke and became unusable. We have decided to disclose this even though it is no longer exploitable. And they call out that this vulnerable firmware versions are 5.21 through to 5.36. The way they worded that, though, is weird, because
I know you didn't. I didn't even need to read the rest of this, and I knew where you were going with this. If there's a vulnerability in a firmware version or multiple firmware versions that subsequently is fixed in future firmware versions, whether they remove the functionality or patch the vulnerability doesn't really matter. The fact that remains is there's a vulnerability in software that is of these versions. So it doesn't mean it's no longer exploitable unless you're running under the premise that Zixel customers upgrade firmware to the latest version 100% of the time across 100% of their customers, which there is no version of the Matrix where 100% of the vulnerabilities in software updates are applied by 100% of the customers. There is one version of the Matrix where that exists.
There's one alternate universe where maybe that's the case.
And it is not a fun place to be, let me tell you.
There's a lot of operational risk in that alternate universe.
Yeah. I got to tell you, I mean, I have arguably a similar type of thing. I'm speaking at CactusCon in like 2 weeks here, and it is effectively the practice session for my RSA talk, because we're going to update the RSA talk, new and improved, and that type of stuff. But the point being here is that we're going to talk about going from firmware or some software, and we're going to go through the software supply chain and find an attack path. And I found some stuff that was going to be a great attack path. And without being able to pick on a potential vendor, have it be open source software and where, quote, no vendor is at fault. I struggled with this one because there's an open source package out there for a web management interface. I'm not going to tell you the name, save it for the talk, right? That was disclosed as having vulnerabilities as of a certain version. But the developers of this package make it freely available. You can use it and you can white box it on any device for web management.
Okay.
But the developers use it on their firmware, their open source firmware exclusively, openware. But the versions on this firmware, openware, their versioning matches nothing like the major versions of this software package. So
This
the
is a
software
problem.
So the software packaging based on the CPEs on the CVE is version 0.10 and below. And every version of OpenWrt that implements this package is git-random string. Because they pull it
So you
from
just
Git
found out
at time of
serialization and canonicalization.
exactly.
But this is a huge supply chain issue that
Massive.
but it's an aspect of supply chain security that is very specific to the identification
Yes.
of software. And how do we identify software or a component that is used inside of software that is very much the same, but sometimes might be called something different or slightly different? How do we identify this component?
Fuzzy logic, man.
Because I may, let's say I get this widget. Oh, well, hold on. Let me. I may get this component as this widget component, and this widget component has a vulnerability. But like I've modified some other stuff inside this widget, except for the vulnerable code. I put it in my software, and then you've got the mainstream that has this widget component that is pinned to whatever, and it's vulnerable. But then someone else has taken that widget component, and they've gone, "Oh, I just changed this like one thing," and so now it's my version of this widget component. Now all three versions are vulnerable to the same flaw. What is the CPE? How do we identify? We can't hash it because the hashes are different.
The CVE and the CPE mentioned in the CVE
is only for one of those three scenarios.
Right. And
this is WebP. This is libwebp.
Wait,
this
it
is
gets
exactly
better.
that.
And then somebody puts out a hotfix, and only two of the three versions roll in the hotfix. And one of them does a dot upgrade for the hotfix, and one of them doesn't do a dot upgrade.
It backports the fix. And how do you know if they backported the fix correctly? And how do you know if that backport actually doesn't introduce another vulnerability entirely, or the backport is not complete? And there are other ways to exploit this said vulnerability, because getting to the root cause of a vulnerability turns out is super hard. Check out our upcoming interview with Sergey Bratis. Holy crap, we're going to talk about that in detail with someone who is one of the smartest people I think I've ever talked to.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So what we're saying here, Paul, if I can summarize,
in bulk.
Yes.
yes, massively, is that we can't score it, we can't identify it, we can't track it. We can't like what the hell are we trying to do here?
Yep. So Josh,
I mean, it's similar to like different strains of a cold virus. I won't even use the popular viruses, right? But it's kind of similar to like why we all still get colds, because they morph and change all the time, and can't identify them because they're morphing and changing so quickly. So we all just get a cold.
But at least we can score a cold. It's killing people. It's not killing people. Like that's
True. Well, I mean,
it's only killing so many people.
Yeah, I mean, there is an impact. Yeah, there is an impact.
But I mean, seriously, we can't score it and communicate risk properly.
If we can't identify
figure out we can't identify it because of canonicalization and serialization issues. We don't have a standardized way to roll in, fork, roll up, backport, and then standardized way to nomenclature for that. Wow, we've got a long way to go as an
But we don't want to overregulate this either. We want the freedom to be able to make these modifications to these components to push forward innovation. But there's a cost associated with that.
And not say overregulate, but there should be a way that everybody uses that says, if you're backporting it, here's how you enumerate that.
You know what we do?
If you're adding a hotfix, here's how you enumerate that.
Josh, we disassemble and we decompile to discover this vulnerability in various components, which is a long way to get to identification of the problem, but it is somewhat, not as reliable as other methods with other constraints put in place. But what we're left with is, if you want to know if your software contains this vulnerability, you're disassembling and or decompiling it to get down to the root cause to identify if your software has that flaw. The common denominator is the flaw exists in the software, right? Everything else surrounding that is somewhat superficial at any given level. But the common denominator is, if I decompile it and look at the source code, I go, yep, your thing is vulnerable. I don't care what you call it or where it lives or whatever.
Yep.
It's there, right? But doing that reliably at scale is where the challenges lie in that methodology.
Yeah, totally. And,
I mean, you live this every day, Larry.
Yeah,
So do I.
this is exactly what I live every day.
Yep.
And there's a decision tree that gets made about some of that and what is feasible to decompile and find and so forth, and what you're given for available information based on the CVE. So CVE could be wildly generic, and that you're not giving specific lines of code that identify the vulnerability, and being able to reproduce and so forth. And if we're only given CPEs for specific matches, like on specific versions where projects may leverage specific Git checkout versions, like we don't have those specific lines of code that make it vulnerable as part of that CVE disclosure, so we can't, in an automated large-scale fashion, be able to determine that. And that's this is where I live every day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Me too.
That's
you know what I see, but maybe not every day. You know what's really funny is I don't know if I've talked about this in the show, I believe, but I've definitely put it out there on social media at least 2 different occasions.
I was going to say, you know what I've seen every day? Like my wiener? Like,
it's good.
And you put it on social media?
No, definitely did not.
Whoa.
But when I've been in a convenience store, I think it's the same chain. I've been in the same chain convenience store here in Rhode Island. I'll say who it is. It's Cumberland Farms, which is a very prolific convenience store.
If this is where I think I'll share another one for you.
So I'm there, and largely because the reason I'm in there in this particular portion of the store.
You're buying Swisher Sweets.
No, different portion of the store. Kids, and your kids definitely bug you to go to the convenience store to buy junk food, which is a thing. But I'm in there because I want to use the ATM, because my particular bank has an agreement with this convenience store chain.
Good. So
I don't have to pay a fee, right? So a lot of times,
it's more convenient than maybe going to the actual bank.
More often than not, I'm like, all right, I'll just go inside and use the ATM because I don't incur fees. But right next to the cash ATM, like traditional bank, traditional cash ATM, is a cryptocurrency. ATM. I don't know if it's not always Bitcoin, but there's a cryptocurrency ATM next to or very close to the cash ATM. And I've observed, being the nerd that I am, I'm like, that's kind of cool. And then I look at the screen and I'm like, it's booting some version of Ubuntu. I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting. I had to take a picture of that for my social media. And so one, I think, was an Ubuntu screen, and the other one was a message that was like, we're working on updates, it's unavailable at the time. I'm like, well, that's kind of interesting too. Like, they're still trying to figure this stuff out. Like, I really want this machine to be in like a working state. So like, I want to go buy like 1% of a Bitcoin or something, just because I say I can go to a convenience store, and I did that,
buy
right?
Bitcoin, right?
But then IOActive publishes research, my story number 12, and it does a security evaluation of this, because the observant nerds that we are, we're like, oh, it runs Ubuntu. Well, tuck that in the back of my brain. That's kind of interesting. It turns out this one was running Lubuntu, which is one of those spin-offs of Ubuntu. And they did a full security evaluation. I mean, IOActive, as we all know, is very prolific in doing this kind of thing. I mean, rest his soul, Barnaby Jack presented at Black Hat and made cash come out of an ATM.
Our good friend Sunshine Steffens.
Yes. I was actually at the presentation at Black Hat when Barnaby
Jackpot
did
at the
that.
ATM.
And dude, it was one of the most amazing points in my career in this industry was watching that. But so like, how do you do that with a Bitcoin ATM? Like, there's no cash that comes out necessarily. I mean, I don't know if you can use these, convert your Bitcoin into cash. I haven't looked into it that much, but I read their research report, and then they got to this point, and it's interesting how they did it. And there's a video on how they did it, manipulating the Linux installation that it kind of pauses at before it flips into the cryptocurrency ATM thing, which I thought was kind of weird. Like, why would you give the user, I guess for maintenance purposes, but it felt like that should have been more guarded. Like, it boots up and then there's like a Linux desktop and then it flips to the ATM. And while there's a Linux desktop, they were able to like do stuff to hack it, run a program to read a QR code and inject into a shell script is like the 30,000 foot view. But they also said, once we gained root access, we could reasonably think that the job was done. However, we looked to the Etsy shadow file where we were able to crack the root password in less than 1 minute, and the same password was valid for all the devices. And that's pretty much all you need to know about cryptocurrency ATMs and their security today.
Yep. See, this wasn't necessarily where I thought you were going with this, because you mentioned something about seeing Android in the wild everywhere on social media the other day.
I saw that Android like kind of recovery screen, and that was a point of sale system in Poland. Well, I may have been confusing, but anyway.
So today we went to to one of the local mom and pop grocery stores because we were earlier for an appointment, and we had to buy an apple pie. So my grandfather-in-law passed away.
Oh yeah, I'm sorry to hear
in his sleep.
Yeah, he was 103.
He was 103.
Wow.
So he led a good life, and we knew it was coming. He's not going to live forever. So the deal was tonight for dinner, the family was going to have his favorite, and for dinner they had apple pie and ice cream to honor.
And that was his favorite, and he lived to 103, which goes to show you. I hear like this stuff all the time, right? I'm like, if you're gonna live your life, live your life.
But
man.
we went to the grocery store to see if we could grab an apple pie, and sure enough, they had it. And we went to the register, and I was going to pay in cash because it was $8 for the apple pie. Yeah. So I'm paying in cash, and as we're handing over the cash, I look down, and I'm glad I didn't want to pay with credit card, because the little payment terminal says something, press power to reboot, and in the background was an error message about it couldn't connect to the Wi-Fi. And this screen was literally, I recognized all the iconography and the font and the messaging. It was a freaking Android tablet.
Yep. Was it fast boot mode?
I have no idea, because I didn't even get there.
Push volume up and volume down to scroll through the menu, and then push the lock button to get to different.
But I recognized
that's fast boot mode.
I recognized the stuff, but it was literally it press power to reboot type of thing, and that was the only thing available. But you could see behind.
You can volume up and volume down, scroll through this like menu, very like limited. It's like a bootloader menu, and you scroll through with the volume up and volume down, and you can go to recovery mode. You can reboot. You can continue boot.
There was unfortunately not enough time.
I did it when I was putting Net Hunter on one of my Pixels.
There was unfortunately not enough time for me to pull up my phone and take a picture of this.
Yeah,
because I had already taken pictures in the meat department where epic. There was a pork shoulder in the meat case.
Oh yeah, pork shoulder.
Pork shoulder. But
put down the smoker.
It was labeled pork shoulder, but the next line was whole, WHOLE, and I read it as pork shoulder, butthole.
I mean, the butt and the shoulder of the pork is
because I'm 12, right?
Josh, weigh in here. Like a pork shoulder and a pork butt is like essentially the same cut.
It is exactly the same thing.
It's the same kind of meat. Cut. It's a picnic butt and a pork shoulder.
Yeah.
And you smoke them and they turn into pulled pork, and they are amazing.
Yeah, and you also take those and you turn those into some other stuff. Oh God, the name is escaping me. From David Chiang's restaurant uses a pork shoulder or a pork butt, but I just thought that wording was fun.
You do pull.
You could do.
What else do you do aside from pulled pork? With
crap.
Pernil, I think it is something from Puerto Rico. I've heard of. You basically knife the hell out of it and throw a garlic clove in every one, and you cook it in the oven. Like there's a lot of things you can do with it. It's one of those long slow, cook it long and slow cuts of meat.
Yes.
And it turns into basically like just meat jelly almost. It's so delicious and tender.
Delicious. I think better than brisket. I don't know. I'm kind of. I'm not hating on the brisket, but I'm kind of like, you know what? There's so many other cuts of meat that
Are so good.
that they aren't the work and the effort and the pain in the ass that
No,
a
I know.
brisket
I
is.
mean,
You know what I'm saying?
I make pastrami. I make pastrami out of the brisket, and it's wonderful, but it's a really serious, long, involved, and pain in the ass process.
Yes. Yeah.
Whereas pulled pork, I season it, I throw it on the smoker, I forget about it for an entire day, I come back, it's done.
You know what I've been doing in brisket lately? Because I got a meat grinder. Is I used to make ground meat. One of my ingredients to ground meat. It's beautiful.
You're not wrong.
Best burgers ever, dude.
You are
Best
not
burgers
wrong.
ever. Right?
You're not wrong. And I'm
Anyway, now we're talking about our meat.
Here's what you do with pork
We
butt.
had-
Here's what you do with pork shoulder. From David Chiang at Momofuku, they have this amazing dish, and the recipe is available for free. A Bosasam pork.
Bosasam.
Bosasam.
So what do you do?
Oh,
What do you, how is that? How is that different?
It is candied. You serve
yeah.
it over like
You had me at candy.
yeah. You serve it on lettuce wraps with rice, like this.
Do you make pulled pork out of it, or do you cube it and make like a burnt end, candied burnt
It's
end?
it's kind of like a Polish
it's
pork.
kind of
Yeah,
muck.
yeah. It's like a Korean
Yeah,
pulled
it's
pork.
thinly sliced.
Almost like a
normally-
pork belly. You'd candy like a pork belly, and that's an
Yeah.
Asian dishes. They do that as well. It's delicious.
So to go off the rails, epic Mike
I
pork
know
story.
we're like 2 minutes older. We're talking about recipe, and you're making me hungry
And I will
now.
make it quick. Momofuku in DC, Mike Poor and I went there a week after their opening. We saw this thing go by, and we're like, we want that. Couldn't get it. You have to book in advance, and we got the restaurant to allow us to have one as long as we brought some friends. We brought some friends. We had it, and it was freaking amazing. And yeah,
Ooh.
On a
I didn't
closing
know this
note,
recipe
you know what was
available.
amazing?
I'm making this. Thank you.
You got to
Yes.
before we
Make
go.
one.
I just want to say you got to read my story number 14, shrouded in mystery. I don't know. I didn't recognize this company or the software, but they made a disclosure.
oh, you
My story-
recognize the company Symantec?
Symantec I recognize, but the company that made the disclosure, Exodus Intel, and I didn't get a lot of time to research because I was kind of hung up on the disclosure timeline. So here's the disclosure timeline. Disclosed to vendor, August 11th, 2021.
What?
Vendor response to disclosure, June 17th, 2022. Disclosed to public, January 25th, 2024. I will just leave you with that.
this
What? I want to know more. Please.
This needs Ivan Arce level of disclosure timeline.
You saw that too, didn't you?
Fuck. What?
And on that note,
On that note, we just get Yvonne back on the show to talk about that. He
Get his
does. He
thoughts.
does want it. He listens too. Hi, Yvonne. Love you,
Jesus
man. We got to
Christ.
catch up.
3 years.
This one is like, wow. Like, I want to know the story behind. You read this and you're like, I want to know the story behind this.
Symantec, you left your customers vulnerable for 3 years.
Symantec messaging gateway.
Are you
Crazy.
surprised? It's Symantec.
Alrighty.
With that,
With that, we will go to our interview with Danny